The rain in Mainz stays failing in the plains. I can only apologise most sincerely and deeply. It's not the usual opening to a video, far from it, but yeah, that has been rattling around in my head ever since we had this ship to first test. I just had to get it out. I know it's actually the Mainz, but you know, my brain is what it is, so there we are. So there's a couple of things to mention before I start talking about the ship. This is obviously a work in progress ship, although it's the second version we've had and probably pretty damn close to the final release version. The first is this is both the last video recorded on my old graphics card, and also it's going to be the first edited and rendered with my new graphics card, so it kind of straddles the gap a bit. And the other is that I've actually, it's going to look a bit different. It's nothing to do with the card. I tweaked the contrast settings in my video editing software. One of my viewers pointed out that it looked kind of flat, a bit dull. So I've experimented with upping the contrast a bit in the actual video editing software. So yeah, lots of, you know, newish things going on in this video. Quite apart from the fact it's also a new ship. So what is the Mainz? Mainz even? I can't even brain. I can't even... You know what I mean. Anyway, it is basically a Hipper, but with Nuremberg guns, more or less. I don't know if it's quite exactly the same guns as the Nuremberg, but they're basically 150mm guns. It's the same turret armour as the Nuremberg. And so, although the first version of this ship wasn't especially appealing with the various tweaks and buffs we've had, and I think it's actually also still due a turret traverse buff, which isn't in the version that you're seeing right here, but I think that was announced as well. Yeah, it's actually now a comparatively decent package. This makes for a quite enjoyable Tier 8 premium light cruiser. It's definitely better than the likes of the Irian. I still wouldn't, you know, compared to stuff like the Kutuzov or the Belfast, I wouldn't maybe say it's as good as those. And a big part of it is the nature of German HE, because you get the extra penetration, so you kind of have built-in IFHE. And I seem to remember running the numbers and actually deciding that IFHE wasn't worth it on this ship at the moment. Of course, IFHE might change in future, maybe. But that comes at the penalty of a decreased fire chance. So although you're getting extra damage from the shells, you're definitely not going to get as much damage from fires as you could with a Kutuzov. A really good Kutuzov game could put you in excess of 200k, and a lot of that would be fire damage, because Kutuzov's got, you know, excellent range. It's got the smoke, it's got the Soviet ballistics, which this plainly doesn't have, as you can see, and it can set a whole bunch of fires, and you slap IFHE on it and you get the damage, so you get the damage and the fires, at least at present. So while this is good, it's not as good as other ships that, you know, are available. But if you compare it to, say, the 155 Megami, it has got a better range, so there's that. It does, in theory, have better armour, so there's that. But yeah, it's not... I mean, a lot of people are maybe not going to find it that exciting, but I kind of enjoyed it. You know, it's not necessarily a sexy ship, but it feels pretty balanced. It does offer something different from both the Hipper and the Prinz Eugen. And it also offers something that we don't really have elsewhere. You can't readily get yourself a Kutuzov, for example. And I'm trying to think if there are any other Tier 8 lights aside from the Irian available at the moment. It's getting hard to keep track of just how many premium ships there are. I mean, certainly we've had far more battleships than we have had other classes, or so it feels like. But yeah, this is definitely, you know, if you look at other available light cruisers at the tier. This is not exactly an oversaturated market, especially as far as the premiums go. So this does definitely constitute a welcome addition to the roster of ships we have available. Unlike when I was talking about the Poltava, and my big question about it is why? Just why? This adds really nothing. It's not that interesting or fun to play. There are other ships that do what it does, but just much, much better. Whereas with the Mainz, it's not, you know, like some of those questions might still apply in some people's minds, but it adds enough of a thing to the game to be interesting. I personally have been rather enjoying it. Now, this particular game is going to be a bit exceptional. It's going to be a bit exceptional in terms of the damage that I did compared to the other games I've had in it. Mainly because of two other players, and we will see them upcoming. You know, you'll know when we get to it. But for now, I'm just pushing forwards with allies and trying to hit people. I do struggle with the ballistics a bit in this, though. It's not necessarily apparent right now, but towards the end of this game, in the closing stages, if you've ever played any of the like the Königsberg, the Nürnberg, you'll know that the German 6-inch, you know, the 150mm shells, not like they're not Soviet. You know, nothing is Soviet. That's the gimmick of the Soviets. They're the ones that get the good ballistics, and everyone else has to kind of make do. So for the most part, especially at the long ranges, you'll be firing engaged in. You'll be needing to give a fair bit of lead, but there are situations when the AP does come in useful, as we're going to see, because this Fiji, for some reason, rather than running away as all their teammates are doing, decided they were going to play like a DD, and they've smoked themselves up, but now they have nobody to spot for them. And I've got that German Hydro, which is a nice bit of team utility that this ship has. So I've popped it a bit early in case torps are coming my way, but as it turns out, the Fiji gets bored sitting in the smoke, decides to come out, and because they're so much against the border here, it means, well, I mean, they could be trying to pull in towards the border, they could be turning a bit, but they're staying flat enough that I decided that, yeah, my AP actually might well be worth a shout here, and so it was, although they're now starting to turn a bit, but yeah, I can just switch back to my HE, and with the extra penetration it gets, I am easily able to finish this guy off. Although I am now going back to AP, that he's flat against the border. Not that it, like AP or HE would do at this stage. So that's enemy player number 1, who's given me a nice chunk of damage. They've taken some hit points off me as well, though. And now we're on to player number 2, this Japayev, who is also going to give me a nice broadside. Now they are slightly further away, and they're also in a quite a decently fast ship. But clearly they've been reading about reverse psychology, because what they do, instead of using that speed to turn away and keep firing at me, is they slow down to practically a dead stop and do so whilst sitting fully broadside. So although I am myself still taking more damage, I'm down to now less than half health. Between those two cruisers, I've now just topped 100,000. Most of my games were not like this. Most of my games did not have nearly such good opportunities to use the AP shells. So I absolutely want to point this out. This was not typical from my experience of this particular ship. Most of my games were probably 70, 80, 90k for a good game. Because you're not going to get the volume of fires that you get with other 6-inch gunned HE cruisers. I have to make that distinction because, you know, we've got the Edinburgh in the game as well. So I wasn't doing so well with the AP, the HE rather, but it's a Synop. It doesn't have that much superstructure, so I actually decided to give the AP a go, and I'm trying to hit the bow plating here, as you can see. And because they are angling, well, they're not angling at all compared to me, but also tangling with our Musashi. Yeah, the AP actually gave me a bit of traction there, so that's a bit more damage. I mean, the AP is usable on this, but you're not going to use it long range. By far my most experience with it has been using HE shells. Demo experts, definitely a must on this captain. if you put a captain on this. But if you're using a Nuremberg captain or something like that, then that's probably worth having anyway. So I should probably take a moment to mention the differences between this and its brethren. It is obviously, you know, a fictional ship, but I seem to remember actually reading about this proposal somewhere to basically take the Hipper hull and mount 150mm guns on it, which would be complete, like, in terms of a light cruiser and tonnage and, you know, resources and materials going in, probably an utterly inefficient thing to do. But, you know, it was by far not the least silly, inefficient thing that the Kriegsmarine had as a potential plan. Although a lot of the sillier things were directly at the behest of Hitler. Anyway, one of the big differences is in the armour, and also I think to take recognition of the fact that these are lighter guns, lighter turrets. This also sits rather higher up in the water. And I'll cover the armour at the end, actually. I don't normally look at armour in that much detail in these work-in-progress videos, but yeah, we'll have a quick look in port at the armour so I can point out exactly what I mean. But sitting higher in the water definitely has an effect, because although you have turtleback armour, you have that same turtleback scheme as Hipper and Eugen, it's that much less effective because some of the citadel is above the waterline. So if there was anything I was going to change about this ship, it would be to have it sit that further bit down, because I don't think this can reach those damage heights of something like a Kutuzov. It just doesn't have that capability based on the fact that it has German HE fire chance. Secondly, the AA is a bit better, at least in theory. It's always a bit hard to tell these days, but the base rating given in the port stats is a bit higher, and delving into the numbers a bit more, it looks like the outer 5.2 envelope is about the same in terms of its potential DPS, but the mid and close range DPS figures are decently higher. So in theory this is a better AA ship, not by a huge margin, but a bit better. So, you know, that's always welcome, I suppose. Lastly, the detectability is the worst of all three. Prince Eugen is the better part of a kilometre. It's like 700, 800 metres worse than... or is it? Yeah, it's about 700-ish and change. I can't remember. I'm going by memory here. But Hipper is just over 11 kilometres, and this is just about 12 kilometres, which is about 200-ish metres worse than Prince Eugen. So that's a bit of a fly in the ointment. There doesn't seem to be any particular reason why it doesn't have as good stealth as the other two. It's not like it's significantly bigger or taller or anything like that. That just seems to be a pure balancing measure. So I didn't get to pick up much more damage against that Graf Zeppelin, and I struggled badly with the ballistics against that Alaska when they were kind of leading away from me at an angle. But otherwise, it was a decent game. 130,000 damage, not quite a Kraken, not that I would have gotten a Kraken medal because it's a test ship. Over 2k base XP, the 4 kills was quite nice, and despite it being a tier 9 game, I think I did all right there. And this is, I think, what you're supposed to do with this ship. You know, it's just a good, solid support cruiser, and the armour compared to the Irian is good enough that you can afford to tank and push a bit, whereas with the Irian you can't. But having said that, you can't do that as much as you can with either the Hipper or the Eugen. Now, the Eugen, of course, has got a heal available, but there's another important difference as well. I also, if you don't notice quite how much AP damage I picked up off those cruisers, it was almost as much as my HE damage. So yeah, those two cruisers were very generous. So we're going to wrap this video up with a closer look at the armour, just to point out the major differences. In fact, let's set the filter to German ships. Oh, I am so professional. I know what I'm doing. Absolutely. It's not a lie. So, the Hipper and the Eugen are basically identical in terms of their armour. The things particularly to note are that they have a 27mm bow and stern section, which means they can't be overmatched by 15 and 16-inch guns, which you'll encounter a lot of. Obviously, you know, lower caliber than that as well. If we strip away some of this armour, we'll also see that we've got a solid 80mm plate here and 25mm plate here, and the top of the Citadel section itself is just about flush with the waterline. It's maybe poking up just above, and Hipper is basically identical. Once we get onto the Mainz, however, 25mm nose and aft armour. Nose, that's the correct naval term, so it can be overmatched. And you've also got some slight differences with, for some reason, part of the athwartship armour is 80mm instead of it being a single 25mm plate. But only the top of the Citadel athwartship is 80mm and the bottom is 25. Now, that probably doesn't make that big of a difference, but this does open up the possibility overall of Citadels through the nose. So you can't be quite as confident with the Mainz as you can with the Eugen and the Hipper around battleships. That's one of the reasons why the Eugen and the Hipper are considered to be quite tanky, even though, you know, an 80mm belt isn't necessarily, on the face of it, it doesn't sound like super amazing or anything like that. The Hawkins and the Emerald down at tier 5 have 76mm belt, but that's good enough to bounce stuff off the belt, and because you can't get penned through the nose, that's where this survivability comes from. Mainz doesn't have that. Mainz has the possibility that it can get Citadels through the nose. So you do have to be a bit more cautious. You can't be as aggressive with the Mainz. If it had a heel, then maybe you could, but it doesn't. And so that, combined with the fact that the Citadel is definitely further above the waterline, it's not hugely above. It's not like it's sitting halfway up the ship or anything, but you can actually clearly see in comparison that, yeah, it's that bit higher up, so it's that bit more vulnerable to being Citadel. But that said, it does still have the turtle back, so although I have overall found it a bit squashier than these two, compared to other tier 8 premiums light cruisers, like the Bayard, for example, that I couldn't remember previously for some reason. Kutuzov I did mention a lot, Montpellier and Wichita. Yeah, it's just got a nice combination of a good range, decent armour, and it's going to have buff turret traverse, as I mentioned as well. So yeah, I'm fairly happy saying I'm more or less like this ship as it is. It could maybe use being lowered a little bit with the Citadel, but I can kind of see why Wargaming's done it. It's another fast-firing light cruiser that relies on firing a lot of HE, and although it's not as dangerous in terms of its fire setting capabilities as stuff like the Chapayev or the Kutuzov or the Irian, or, you know, the American ships here, it still has that potential, so therefore they've made it a bit less survivable with particularly the armour changes. There is one bright side, however. There is one other oddity I noted, and I've just remembered this. For some reason, despite having the same 27mm torpedo protection in the actual armour viewer, if you look at the survivability stats, Mainz has 22% torp damage reduction. Hipper and Eugen both only have 10%. So it does get a little bit something back. You know, you've got the good hydro, and you can actually get a pretty decent damage reduction compared to a lot of other cruisers. Most cruisers do not have anything like that. Edinburgh doesn't have any. I'm just randomly clicking ships now. 4%, what's Atago got? 16%, that's one of the better ones. I think 22% might even be the top protection of any of the tier 8 cruisers. No, I tell a lie, Bayard has 28%. It's not exactly a thing I have in my head, you know, the torque protection values of all the cruisers. But okay, so it's not as good as Bayard, but it's still pretty good. So it does have that little extra something as well. So that's about it for the Mainz. I will refrain from singing again. I can only apologise. I don't know what came over me. It's just I had to. I just had to. That's how my brain works. It just had to happen. Anyway, so yeah, hopefully you found this video useful. If you have, you could do all the usual things down underneath it. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.